Ethan stood frozen at the doorway, his heart pounding as he saw his wife, Sophia, tangled in an embrace with Victor. The warehouse doors burst open with a deafening crash, and armed officers flooded the room. Victor's smug grin disappeared as handcuffs snapped around his wrists. One evening, Ethan found an envelope slipped under his door. Inside was a photo of his shattered car window, along with the chilling message, "We're watching you." Ethan sat across from Victor in the dimly lit warehouse, his pulse racing as he played his role. Victor leaned closer, suspicion glinting in his eyes. "You look familiar," he muttered. Ethan stood outside the community center, watching families gather for an evening movie. Laughter filled the air, a stark contrast to the darkness he'd endured. For the first time in years, he felt at peace. The past was behind him, and a brighter future awaited. Welcome to the Alibis Exposed, where trust meets betrayal in the dark. Ethan Carter stood in the kitchen, sipping his morning coffee as the soft hum of the suburban neighborhood filled the air. The sun cast a golden glow through the windows, illuminating the small but cozy home he had built with Sophia. From the Yikta outside, their life seemed perfect, a loving couple, a comfortable home, and a promising future. But lately, Ethan had felt an unsettling shift, like a faint tremor before an earthquake. Sophia, as always, was rushing to get ready for work. Her auburn hair was tied in a loose bun, and her green eyes sparkled with the usual confidence that had captivated Ethan when they first met. But there was something different about her now, something Ethan couldn't quite put his finger on. Her phone buzzed incessantly with notifications, and she was often distracted, her laughter sounding forced. "You're up early," Ethan said, trying to mask the tension he felt creeping into his voice. Sophia glanced at him and smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. "Big day at work," she said, grabbing her bag. "I've got a meeting with some clients, so I might be late tonight." "Don't wait up." Ethan nodded, watching her leave. As the door closed behind her, he set his mug down and sighed. This wasn't the first time she'd made excuses to stay out late. He wanted to trust her, but the doubts gnawed at him, relentless and unforgiving. Later that day, Ethan decided to take action. He'd always been a man of logic and reason, traits that made him a great teacher. But now he needed to apply those skills to his personal life. He started by checking their shared bank account. Over the past few months, there had been unusual withdrawals and charges, dinners at fancy restaurants, hotel bookings, and even jewelry purchases that Sophia had never mentioned. Ethan's heart sank as the pieces began to fall into place. He couldn't ignore the signs anymore. Sophia was hiding something, and whatever it was, it had the potential to destroy the life they'd built together. He debated confronting her immediately, but decided against it. Instead, he called his younger brother, Nathan. "Nathan, can you come over? I need to talk," Ethan said, trying to keep his voice steady. Nathan arrived within the hour, his easygoing demeanor a stark contrast to Ethan's somber mood. "What's going on, big bro? You sounded off on the phone." Ethan hesitated, then laid everything out: the late nights, the suspicious expenses, and the growing distance between him and Sophia. Nathan listened intently, his brow furrowing. As the story unfolded, "Look, I don't want to jump to conclusions," Nathan said, "but it sounds like you need answers. If she's hiding something, you deserve to know." Ethan nodded. "I've been thinking the same thing, but how do I even start?" "I don't want to accuse her without proof." Nathan leaned back in his chair, thoughtful. "Well, there's always the direct approach. Or you could dig a little deeper, check her phone, follow her, hire a private investigator." The idea of spying on Sophia made Ethan uneasy, but he couldn't shake the feeling that he was already living a lie. He needed the truth, no matter how painful it might be. That evening, Ethan waited for Sophia to come home. As the hours ticked by, his anxiety grew. She finally walked in around midnight, her hair slightly disheveled, and a faint scent of perfume that wasn't hers clinging to her clothes. "You're up late," Sophia said, surprised to see him sitting on the couch. Ethan forced a smile. "Yeah, couldn't sleep. How was your meeting?" She hesitated for a fraction of a second, just enough for Ethan to notice. It went well, long but productive. Ethan nodded, letting the moment pass. He wasn't ready to confront her yet. Not without proof. The next few days were a blur of quiet observation. Ethan started noticing more inconsistencies. Text messages Sophia quickly dismissed, unexplained, absences, and a growing emotional distance between them. He finally decided to take Nathan's advice and dig deeper. One evening, while Sophia was in the shower, Ethan picked up her phone. His hands trembled as he navigated to her messages. At first, there was nothing unusual. Then he found a conversation with someone named Ryan M. The messages were brief but telling. Plans to meet, shared jokes, and an intimacy that cut Ethan to his core. His chest tightened as he scrolled through the exchange. Ryan Miller. The name echoed in his mind, a stranger who had somehow wormed his way into his marriage. Ethan spent the next day doing research. Ryan wasn't just some random fling. He had a record, fraud, embezzlement, and a reputation for manipulating people to get what he wanted. Suddenly, the strange transactions on their account made sense. Sophia wasn't just cheating, she was involved in something much darker. The realization hit Ethan like a freight train. His wife, the woman he had loved and trusted, wasn't who he thought she was. And Ryan Miller was pulling the strings, but Ethan wasn't going to let them get away with it. Not without a fight. The pieces fell into place, Ethan's resolve hardened. He called Nathan again and explained what he'd discovered. "This isn't just about me anymore," Ethan said. "If Ryan's using Sophia, he could ruin her life. And if she's willingly going along with it..." He didn't finish the thought, but Nathan understood. "What's your plan?" Nathan asked. Ethan paused, his mind racing. "I'm going to gather more evidence, and then I'm going to make sure they both pay for what they've done." Ethan nodded, his expression grim. "Whatever you need, I've got your back." As Ethan stared out the window, the weight of betrayal still heavy on his heart, a new determination took hold. He wasn't just a victim of Sophia's lies. He was the architect of her reckoning. Ethan didn't waste any time. Armed with the knowledge of Sophia's infidelity and Ryan's criminal background, he began his mission to gather irrefutable evidence. But he knew he couldn't do it alone. Nathan suggested reaching out to Detective Laura Hayes, a family friend, who had a reputation for being relentless when it came to justice. "Laura's sharp," Nathan said during one of their late-night talks. "She'll know what to do, and she can make sure everything stays legal. You don't want to cross any lines, Ethan," Ethan agreed, though the idea of bringing someone else into his personal life made him uneasy. Still, he needed help, and Laura was his best option. The next morning, Ethan met with Laura at a quiet cafe on the edge of town. She was in her early 40s, with sharp blue eyes that seemed to pierce through lies and half-truths. "Nathan filled me in," Laura said after they exchanged pleasantries. "I'm sorry you're going through this, Ethan. It's never easy to find out someone you love has betrayed you." Ethan nodded, swallowing the lump in his throat. "I need to know the full extent of it, and I need to make sure they can't hurt anyone else." Laura leaned forward, her expression serious. Do you have anything concrete? Messages, transactions, anything that ties them together? Ethan pulled out his phone and showed her the screenshots of Sophia's messages with Ryan, as well as the suspicious charges on their account. Laura studied them carefully, nodding as she pieced together the puzzle. This is a good start, she said. But if we're going to build a case, we need more. I'll start looking into Ryan Miller, see if he's involved in anything recent. In the meantime, keep an eye on Sophia. If she's part of this, she might slip up. Ethan agreed, grateful for Laura's support. As they left the cafe, he felt a small glimmer of hope. He wasn't alone in this fight anymore. Back at home, Ethan began to notice even more cracks in Sophia's facade. She was increasingly evasive, often disappearing for hours without explanation. But now, instead of feeling helpless, Ethan felt a sense of purpose. He documented every inconsistency, every lie, and every suspicious interaction. One evening, he followed her. She had claimed she was meeting a friend for dinner, but instead she drove to a secluded parking lot on the outskirts of town. Ethan parked a safe distance away and watched as she got into a black sedan. The man in the driver's seat was unmistakable. Ryan Miller. Ethan's heart pounded as he took photos from his car. The two of them talked for a while, their expressions serious. Then Sophia handed Ryan an envelope, and they drove off in separate directions. When Ethan showed the photos to Laura, she nodded grimly. This isn't just an affair. That envelope likely contained cash or documents. Whatever they're involved in, it's bigger than we thought. Ethan's stomach churned at the thought. He had hoped, deep down, that Sophia was being manipulated, that she wasn't a willing participant in Ryan's schemes, but the evidence suggested otherwise. Laura placed a reassuring hand on his shoulder. We'll get to the bottom of this. Just stay strong. Ethan nodded, determination hardening in his eyes. He wasn't just fighting for justice anymore. He was fighting to reclaim his life and to ensure that Sophia and Ryan would face the consequences of their action. Ethan awoke the next morning with a gnawing determination to uncover the full truth about Sophia's betrayal. While Laura Hayes continued her investigation into Ryan Miller's criminal activities, Ethan decided to take matters into his own hands to unearth Sophia's hidden motives. The first step was revisiting their shared financial records. Ethan had always trusted Sophia with their household expenses, but now that trust felt like naivety. Over the years, he'd occasionally skimmed their joint account statements, but this time he analyzed every line with meticulous care. A pattern emerged, seemingly innocuous withdrawals paired with payments to an account under the name M. Langston. The name sparked no immediate recognition, so Ethan dove deeper. An online search revealed that Langston owned several businesses, a luxury car rental service, a high-end boutique, and a private security firm. But these ventures only scratched the surface. Hidden behind Langston's veneer of legitimacy were allegations of money laundering and ties to organized crime. Ethan's blood ran cold. It wasn't just an affair anymore. Sophia was entangled in a far-reaching web of deceit. Later that day, Ethan met with Laura to share his findings. Langston's been on our radar for years, Laura said, frowning as she reviewed the account details Ethan had compiled. He's the kind of guy who thrives on secrecy. If Sophia and Ryan are working with him, it's not just fraud or theft, it's something much bigger. Laura's words confirmed Ethan's fears. His once idyllic life had become a battlefield, and the stakes were higher than he ever imagined. What's our next move? Ethan asked, trying to mask the tremor in his voice. I'll push my contacts to find out more about Langston's recent activities, Laura said. In the meantime, I need you to keep a low profile. Act normal around Sophia. If she catches on that you're investigating, it could escalate things." Ethan nodded, though the thought of pretending everything was fine made his stomach churn. That evening, Ethan returned home to find Sophia in the kitchen, humming softly as she prepared dinner. For a moment, he felt a pang of longing for the life they once shared. But the illusion shattered as he remembered the text messages, the unexplained absences, and now the connection to Langston. During dinner, Ethan tried to engage Sophia in casual conversation. "How was work today?" he asked, keeping his tone light. Sophia barely looked up from her plate. "Busy, as usual. We've got a new project coming up. It's been taking a lot of my time." Ethan nodded, biting back the urge to confront her. He knew better than to tip his hand prematurely. A few nights later, Ethan followed Sophia again. She had claimed she was meeting a colleague for drinks, but instead she drove to an upscale apartment complex in the city. Ethan parked a safe distance away and watched. As she entered the building, after about 20 minutes, Sophia emerged with Ryan Miller. Ethan's pulse quickened as he snapped photos from his car. The two of them appeared tense, their conversation animated but inaudible. Sophia handed Ryan a small package before they parted ways. Ethan's mind raced. What was in the package? Money? Documents? Whatever it was, it confirmed that Sophia and Ryan's relationship wasn't just romantic, it was transactional. The next morning, Ethan shared the photos with Laura. She studied them intently before letting out a low whistle. "This isn't just infidelity," she said. "They're running something. That package could be evidence, but we need more before we can act." "How do we get more?" Ethan asked, desperation creeping into his voice. "Let me handle it," Laura said firmly. "I'll work with my team to monitor Ryan and Langston. In the meantime, I need you to stay out of it. This is getting dangerous, Ethan." Ethan reluctantly agreed. He trusted Laura, but his patience was wearing thin. That evening, Ethan decided to confront Sophia. Directly, he needed to see her reaction to gauge how deep her lies went. As they sat across from each other in the living room, Ethan's heart pounded. "Sophia, we need to talk," he began, his voice steady despite the storm brewing inside him. She looked up from her phone, her expression unreadable. "About what?" "About us," Ethan said. "And about Ryan." For a moment, her face betrayed a flicker of panic. But she quickly composed herself, her lips curling into a bitter smile. "So, you've been snooping," she said, her tone. "Icy. Don't turn this around," Ethan replied, his anger simmering just beneath the surface. "I've seen the messages. I know about the money. I know you've been lying to me." Sophia's eyes narrowed. "You don't know anything," she snapped. "You think you're so clever, piecing together half-truths and jumping to conclusions. But you have no idea what's really going on." "Then tell me," Ethan said, his voice rising. "Tell me what's going on, Sophia. Who is Ryan? What are you involved in?" Sophia stood abruptly, her chair scraping against the floor. "I don't owe you an explanation," she said, her voice cold. "And frankly, I'm done with this conversation." She stormed out of the room, leaving Ethan alone with his thoughts. Her refusal to explain only solidified his resolve. Whatever she was hiding, he would uncover it. And he wouldn't stop until he brought her and Ryan's schemes crashing down. As the days passed, Ethan threw himself into gathering more evidence. He installed a discreet camera in their home office, hoping to catch Sophia in the act of transferring money or communicating with Ryan. Meanwhile, Laura's investigation gained momentum. She discovered that Langston had recently acquired several properties, including a remote warehouse that was rumored to be a hub for illicit activities. "We're closing in," Laura told Ethan during a late-night call, "but we need one final piece of evidence to tie everything together." Ethan's determination hardened. "Tell me what I can do," Laura hesitated. "Just stay safe," she said. "This is bigger than you or me, but we'll bring them down. I promise." As Ethan hung up, he felt a renewed sense of purpose. He wasn't just fighting for justice, he was fighting for his dignity, his future, and the chance to reclaim his life from the wreckage Sophia had left behind. Ethan's resolve to uncover the truth pushed him into increasingly dangerous territory. While Laura continued her investigation, Ethan's covert surveillance began paying off. One evening, while reviewing footage from the hidden camera in the home office, Ethan caught Sophia in a moment of carelessness. She was on the phone, speaking in hushed tones to someone, likely Ryan, and scribbling details into a notebook. Her words were fragmented but telling. "The shipment arrives Friday. Langston's expecting it to go smoothly." "No, he can't know about Ethan." Ethan froze the footage and replayed it several times. The mention of Langston and a shipment confirmed his worst fears. Sophia was deeply involved in something illegal. The next morning, Ethan met Laura at a coffee shop. He slid a USB drive across the table. "This is from my hidden camera," Ethan explained. "She's planning something for Friday. There's a shipment, and Langston's involved." Laura plugged the drive into her laptop and watched the footage with a grim expression. "This is the break we needed," she said. "We'll need to act fast to intercept that shipment. If Langston's behind it, it could be the key to bringing his entire operation down." Ethan nodded, his anxiety mounting. "What happens to Sophia?" he asked hesitantly. Laura hesitated. "That depends on how deeply she's involved. If she's complicit, there will be consequences." Ethan's chest tightened. Despite everything, part of him still wanted to protect Sophia. But he knew he couldn't let her crimes go unpunished. That evening, Ethan decided to confront Sophia once more. He needed to know how far she had fallen. As she sat in the living room scrolling through her phone, Ethan approached with measured steps. "We need to talk," he said firmly. Sophia looked up, her expression guarded. "What now, Ethan?" Ethan held her gaze. "I know about the shipment. I know about Langston. Whatever you're involved in, it's dangerous and it's going to catch up with you." Sophia's face hardened. "You don't know what you're talking about." "Don't lie to me anymore," Ethan said, his voice rising. "I've seen the evidence. I've heard the phone calls. You're in over your head, and it's only a matter of time before it all comes crashing down." Sophia stood, her posture defiant. "Stay out of this, Ethan. You have no idea what's at stake." "Then tell me," Ethan pleaded. "Tell me why you've been lying. Why you're working with someone like Langston." Sophia hesitated, her resolve wavering. For a moment, Ethan thought she might open up, but then she shook her head. "You wouldn't understand," she said quietly, before retreating to the bedroom. Ethan was left standing in the living room, his mind racing with unanswered questions. The following days passed in a blur. Laura's team moved quickly, securing a warrant to monitor Langston's communications. Meanwhile, Ethan continued gathering what evidence he could. On Friday evening, Ethan parked his car near the warehouse Laura had identified as Langston's hub. He wasn't supposed to be there. Laura had explicitly told him to stay away, but he couldn't resist the urge to see things unfold firsthand. Through binoculars, Ethan watched as a convoy of black SUVs pulled up to the warehouse. Men in suits stepped out, their movements efficient and purposeful. Moments later, a delivery truck arrived. The back doors swung open, revealing crates that were quickly unloaded by Langston's men. Ethan's heart raced as he spotted Sophia among the group. She stood beside Ryan, her expression tense as she spoke to one of the men. Ethan fumbled for his phone, snapping photos and recording video from his vantage point. Suddenly, the sound of sirens shattered the night. Police vehicles swarmed the area, red and blue lights cutting through the darkness. Officers emerged, weapons drawn, shouting commands. Chaos erupted as Langston's men scrambled to escape. Ethan watched in shock as Sophia and Ryan were handcuffed and led to a police car. Langston, however, was nowhere to be seen. The man had slipped away in the confusion, leaving his associates to face the consequences. The next morning, Ethan met Laura at the precinct. "We got most of them," Laura said, though her tone was tinged with frustration. "But Langston, he's like a ghost. He'll resurface eventually, but for now, he's in the wind." "What about Sophia?" Ethan asked, his voice hollow. Laura sighed. "She's cooperating, claimed she was coerced into working with Langston. It's possible she'll get a reduced sentence, but it's too early to say." Ethan nodded, his emotions a tangled mess. He had fought for the truth and found it, but the cost was higher than he ever imagined. As he walked out of the precinct, he felt a bittersweet sense of closure. The web had tightened around Sophia and her accomplices, but Ethan knew his journey was far from over. He had his own healing to do, his own life to rebuild, and that, he realized, was the most important battle of all. In the weeks following Sophia's arrest, Ethan's life took on a strange and uneasy rhythm. He spent most of his days organizing his thoughts and trying to make sense of the chaos. The betrayal still cut deep, but the knowledge that Sophia's actions were no longer his burden provided a small sense of relief. One morning, Ethan received a call from Laura. "We've been processing the evidence we seized from the warehouse," she explained. "There's more to Langston's operation than we initially thought. It's an international network. Drugs, weapons, counterfeit goods. He's into everything." Ethan listened in silence, his grip tightening on the phone. "What about Sophia?" he asked finally. Laura's voice softened. "She's providing information. Her testimony could be pivotal in taking Langston down, but her involvement in his operations was significant. The DA's office is weighing its options. She'll likely face prison time." Ethan thanked Laura and hung up, his mind racing. While Sophia's fate was out of his hands, the remnants of their life together were still scattered around him. He knew he needed to move forward, but the path ahead felt uncertain. Ethan began by focusing on his career. His architectural firm had been on autopilot for months, and it was time to take the reins again. He threw himself into a new project, a community center designed to provide resources for at-risk youth. The work was challenging, but it gave him purpose. Each blueprint he drafted felt like a step toward reclaiming his sense of self. In his personal life, Ethan started reaching out to old friends. Many of them had drifted away during his marriage to Sophia, but they welcomed him back without hesitation. Over dinners and late-night conversations, Ethan rediscovered the joy of genuine connection. He shared bits and pieces of his ordeal, but mostly he focused on rebuilding his life. One evening, Ethan received an unexpected visitor, Ryan's ex-wife, Claire. She arrived at his doorstep with a folder of documents and a determined expression. "I thought you might want to see this," she said, handing him the folder. "It's everything I've collected about Ryan over the years. Bank statements, emails, even some surveillance photos. I didn't know what to do with it before, but now that he's been arrested, I figured it might help." Ethan invited her in, and they spent hours poring over the contents of the folder. Claire's meticulous documentation painted a damning picture of Ryan's activities. It also revealed connections to other figures in Langston's network, providing crucial leads that Laura could use in her investigation. As the evening wore on, Ethan and Claire found themselves sharing their experiences. They bonded over their mutual betrayals and the shared desire to rebuild their lives. By the time Claire left, Ethan felt a renewed sense of clarity. He wasn't alone in this fight, and he wasn't powerless. The next day, Ethan met with Laura to hand over Claire's documents. Laura's eyes widened as she flipped through the pages. "This is incredible," she said. "With this, we can tighten the net around Langston and his associates. Claire's bravery in coming forward could make all the difference." Ethan nodded. "She's been through a lot, but she's ready to fight back, just like me." Laura gave him a small smile. "You've come a long way, Ethan. I know this hasn't been easy, but you're making a difference." As the weeks turned into months, Ethan's life began to stabilize. The community center project neared completion, and he felt a deep sense of pride in what he had accomplished. Claire became a close friend and ally, and together they supported each other through the challenges of rebuilding. Meanwhile, Laura's investigation continued to bear fruit. Langston's network was unraveling, thanks in part to the evidence Ethan and Claire had provided. Arrests were made across the country, and the media buzzed with stories of the takedown. Ethan followed the news with a mixture of satisfaction and sadness. He was proud to have played a role in bringing justice, but the scars of betrayal still lingered. Sophia's trial was looming, and he knew it would bring a new wave of emotions. One evening, as Ethan stood in the nearly finished community center, he allowed himself a moment of reflection. The building's walls were adorned with vibrant murals painted by local artists, and the sound of children's laughter echoed from the playground outside. This was his legacy, a testament to resilience and the power of starting over. For the first time in months, Ethan felt at peace. The road ahead was still uncertain, but he had found his footing. And as he stepped outside to watch the sunset, he knew he was ready for whatever came next. As Sophia's trial date approached, Ethan's days were filled with mixed emotions. The betrayal and loss still lingered, but his progress in rebuilding his life gave him a sense of accomplishment. Yet the past had a way of creeping back in, especially when he least expected it. One morning, Ethan was in his office reviewing final plans for the community center's opening ceremony when his phone buzzed with a message from Claire. "We need to talk. It's about Sophia." Ethan's stomach churned. He hadn't spoken to Sophia since her arrest and wasn't sure he wanted to know anything more. But Claire's tone suggested urgency, so he agreed to meet her at a nearby park. When he arrived, Claire was already waiting, pacing near a bench. She greeted him with a tight smile and wasted no time getting to the point. "Sophia's been trying to reach out," Claire said, holding up her phone. "She's sent me messages through her lawyer asking me to talk to you on her behalf." Ethan frowned. "What does she want?" "Forgiveness," Claire replied. "And?" "She wants to meet with you." Ethan's jaw tightened. "Why would I want to see her, after everything she's done?" "I don't know," Claire admitted. "But maybe it's worth hearing her out. Closure can be powerful." Ethan stared at the ground, torn. Part of him wanted to confront Sophia, to demand answers, but another part of him feared reopening old wounds. "I'll think about it," he said finally. Later that evening, Ethan sat on his porch, gazing out at the quiet street. His mind replayed the moments that had led to Sophia's downfall. The lies, the betrayal, the criminal activities. He thought about the woman he had married, the life they had shared, and how it had all unraveled. Could facing her bring the closure he needed, or would it only deepen the scars? The sound of footsteps interrupted his thoughts. Looking up, he saw Laura approaching, her expression serious. "We need to talk," she said. Something's come up in the investigation." Ethan gestured for her to sit. "What is it?" Laura handed him a file. Inside were photos and documents that detailed Langston's recent activities. To Ethan's surprise, there were also mentions of Sophia. "She's been more involved than we thought," Laura explained. "We initially believed she was coerced, but new evidence suggests she played an active role in several of Langston's schemes." Ethan's hands tightened around the file. "Why are you telling me this?" "Because you're part of this now," Laura said. "Whether you like it or not, your actions have helped unravel Langston's network. And if Sophia's more culpable than we thought, it changes everything, including her potential sentence." Ethan's mind raced. He had wanted the truth, but now that it was staring him in the face, he wasn't sure he could handle it. The next day, Ethan decided to visit Sophia in jail. The decision didn't come easily, but he knew he couldn't move forward without confronting her. He needed to hear her side, even if it wouldn't change anything. When he entered the visitation room, Sophia was already seated, her appearance a stark contrast to the confident woman he once knew. She looked tired, her eyes filled with a mix of regret and defiance. "Ethan," she said softly as he sat across from her. He didn't respond immediately, studying her face for any sign of the truth. Finally, he spoke. "Why?" he asked. "Why did you do it? The lies, the betrayal, the criminal activities. Was any of it worth it?" Sophia's eyes filled with tears. "I didn't mean for things to get this far," she said. "It started small. Ryan introduced me to Langston, and at first it seemed harmless. But then it spiraled out of control. By the time I realized how deep I was in, it was too late." Ethan's jaw tightened. "You could have come to me. You could have told me the truth." "And what would you have done?" Sophia shot back. "You're an architect, Ethan, not a cop. You couldn't have stopped Langston. He's dangerous." "You didn't even give me a chance," Ethan said, his voice rising. "You chose to lie, to cheat, to put both of our lives at risk. Sophia." Looked down, her tears falling freely now. "I was scared," she admitted. "But that doesn't excuse what I did. I've made mistakes, terrible mistakes, and I'll have to live with them for the rest of my life." Ethan took a deep breath, his anger giving way to a profound sadness. "I loved you, Sophia. I would have done anything for you, but you destroyed that." "You destroyed us," Sophia's voice broke. "I'm sorry, Ethan, for everything." He stood, his decision made. "I hope you find peace, Sophia, but I can't be a part of your life anymore." As he walked away, Ethan felt a strange sense of relief. The chapter with Sophia was finally closing, and though the scars would remain, he knew he was ready to move forward. Back at home, Ethan found himself reflecting on the encounter. For the first time in months, he felt a sense of clarity. He couldn't change the past, but he could shape his future. And that future, he decided, would be one of purpose and integrity. The next morning, Ethan returned to the community center, where the final preparations for the opening ceremony were underway. As he watched the team bring his vision to life, he felt a renewed sense of hope. The shadows of the past might linger, but they no longer controlled him. With each passing day, Ethan took another step forward, leaving the darkness behind and embracing the light of a new beginning. The courtroom buzzed with tension as Sophia's trial began. Reporters gathered outside, eager to capture every moment of the high-profile case. Inside, Ethan sat in the back row, unsure why he had come. Perhaps it was curiosity, or maybe he needed closure. Whatever the reason, he found himself unable to stay away. The prosecution painted a damning picture of Sophia's involvement in Langston's criminal network. Evidence included intercepted communications, bank records, and testimony from former associates. The narrative was clear. Sophia had been a willing participant, not a victim. Ethan watched as the prosecution presented surveillance footage showing Sophia entering Langston's warehouse, her face a mask of determination. Seeing her in those moments, so different from the woman he thought he knew, felt like a punch to the gut. The defense, led by an experienced attorney, argued that Sophia had been coerced. They highlighted the danger Langston posed and claimed Sophia had acted out of fear for her life. The defense's star witness was Sophia herself. When she took the stand, the courtroom fell silent. Sophia's voice wavered as she began her testimony. "I didn't set out to hurt anyone," she said. "When I met Langston, I thought he was just a businessman. By the time I realized the truth, I was already in too deep. He threatened me, and I believed he would follow through. I did what I had to do to survive." Ethan's jaw tightened as he listened. Her words were compelling, but he couldn't shake the feeling that she was only telling part of the truth. The prosecution cross-examined her relentlessly, pointing out inconsistencies in her story and emphasizing her continued involvement even after opportunities to leave. As the trial progressed, Ethan found himself reflecting on his own journey. He had spent months rebuilding his life, finding purpose in his work and connections in the community. Being in the courtroom, surrounded by the remnants of his past, was a stark reminder of how far he had come. Outside the courtroom, Ethan ran into Laura, who had been closely monitoring the trial as part of her ongoing investigation. "How's it looking?" he asked. Laura's expression was grim. "It's hard to say. The evidence against Sophia is strong, but her defense team is good. They're playing the coercion angle hard, and it might resonate with the jury." "Do you think she's telling the truth?" Ethan asked. Laura hesitated. "I think there's some truth in what she's saying. Langston is dangerous, and he's certainly capable of threats. But Sophia made choices, and those choices have consequences." Ethan nodded, appreciating her honesty. "Whatever happens, I just hope justice is served." As the trial neared its conclusion, the jury deliberated for hours, their decision weighed down by the complexities of the case. Ethan found himself pacing outside the courthouse, the tension almost unbearable. He wasn't sure what outcome he wanted. Seeing Sophia held accountable might bring closure, but it wouldn't erase the pain she had caused. Finally, the jury returned with a verdict, guilty on multiple counts, including conspiracy and fraud. Sophia's sentencing was set for a later date, but the weight of the decision was clear. She faced years in prison. Ethan sat in his car after the verdict, staring at the courthouse steps. He felt a strange mix of emotions, relief, sadness, and an odd sense of finality. Sophia's chapter in his life was officially over. It was time to focus on the future. In the weeks following the trial, Ethan poured himself into the community center project. The grand opening was just around the corner, and the building buzzed with activity. Volunteers painted walls, arranged furniture, and prepared programs for the first wave of visitors. Claire became a frequent presence at the center, offering her support and ideas. She and Ethan had formed a close bond, their shared experiences creating a foundation of trust and understanding. Together, they envisioned a space that would empower others to overcome their own challenges. The opening day arrived with fanfare. Local officials, community leaders, and families gathered to celebrate the new resource. As Ethan stood on the stage to deliver a speech, he felt a swell of pride. This center represented not just his resilience, but the resilience of everyone who had contributed to its creation. "This is more than a building," Ethan said, his voice steady. "It's a symbol of hope, A reminder that no matter what we've been through, we can rebuild, we can rise. The crowd erupted in applause, and Ethan's heart felt lighter than it had in months. For the first time in a long while, he felt truly free. Later that evening, as the festivities wound down, Ethan stood outside the centre, watching the sunset. Claire joined him, a warm smile on her face. "You did it," she said. "This place is incredible." "We did it," Ethan corrected. "I couldn't have done this without you." Claire's smile widened. "So what's next?" Ethan considered the question. For so long, his focus had been on surviving and rebuilding. Now, with the centre open and his past behind him, the possibilities felt endless. "I'm not sure," he admitted. "But for the first time in a while, I'm excited to find out." Claire nodded, and they stood in companionable silence, the future stretching out before them like a blank canvas. The glow of the community centre's grand opening lingered in Ethan's heart, but life had a way of throwing curveballs when least expected. 2 weeks after the ceremony, Ethan received an unmarked envelope in his mailbox. Inside was a single sheet of paper, the ink smudged as if hastily written. "Ethan, you don't know everything. Langston's network isn't done with you." No signature, no explanation, just the chilling implication that his ordeal wasn't over. Ethan's first instinct was to call Laura. Within an hour, she was at his house, studying the note with a grim expression. "It could be a scare tactic," she said, though her tone lacked conviction. "Or it could be real. Langston's network wasn't small, and dismantling it fully takes time." "What should I do?" Ethan asked. "Stay vigilant. Keep an eye out for anything unusual. And call me if you notice anything out of the ordinary," Laura advised. Ethan nodded, but unease settled in his chest like a heavy stone. Just when he thought he had escaped the shadows of his past, they seemed to be creeping back. Over the next few days, Ethan tried to focus on his work, but the note haunted him. He found himself double-checking locks, looking over his shoulder, and scanning unfamiliar cars parked near his house. It felt like paranoia, but he couldn't shake the feeling that someone was watching. One evening, Ethan decided to clear his mind with a late-night drive. The quiet roads and cool air provided a temporary reprieve from his anxiety, but as he turned onto a darkened street, headlights appeared in his rearview mirror, following closely. At first, he dismissed it as coincidence, but when he changed lanes and the car mirrored his movements, his pulse quickened. Ethan's grip on the steering wheel tightened as he navigated toward a more populated area. Finally, he turned into a gas station, hoping the other car would continue on its way. It didn't. The vehicle pulled into the lot, parking several spaces away. Ethan's heart pounded as he considered his options. Should he confront the driver? Call the police? Before he could decide, the car door opened and a man stepped out. To Ethan's surprise, it was someone he recognized. Jack, one of Langston's former associates, who had turned state's witness. Jack approached cautiously, his hands raised in a gesture of peace. "Ethan, I need to talk to you," he said, his voice low. Reluctantly, Ethan rolled down his window. "What are you doing here?" "Trying to warn you," Jack replied. "Langston's operation isn't as dead as everyone thinks. There's a power vacuum, and some of his people are trying to fill it. They're not happy with you for exposing them." Ethan's stomach churned. "Why are you telling me this?" "Because I'm trying to stay alive," Jack said. "If they think I'm helping you, it keeps me in their good graces, but you need to watch your back. They're not above using scare tactics or worse." Ethan nodded, his mind racing. "Do you know who's behind this?" Jack hesitated. "There's a guy named Victor. He's ruthless, and he's trying to take over Langston's territory. If he sees you as a threat, he won't hesitate to come after you." "What can I do?" Ethan asked. "Keep your head down and let the authorities handle it," Jack said. "Laura's good at her job, but she can't watch you 24/7. Be smart. Don't make yourself an easy target." With that, Jack returned to his car and drove away, leaving Ethan alone with a sinking feeling of dread. The next morning, Ethan met with Laura again to relay Jack's warning. She listened intently, her brow furrowed. "Victor," she murmured, scribbling notes in her notebook. "I've heard the name. He's been on our radar but hasn't made any overt moves yet. If Jack's information is reliable, that could change." "What should I do?" Ethan asked. "We'll increase patrols in your neighborhood and keep an eye on Victor," Laura said. "But Ethan, you need to stay vigilant. Don't take unnecessary risks." Ethan nodded, though the advice did little to ease his anxiety. The thought of being dragged back into Langston's world was almost too much to bear. As the days turned into weeks, Ethan tried to maintain a sense of normalcy. He continued his work at the community center and leaned on Claire for support. Their bond had deepened, and her presence provided a sense of stability amid the chaos. But the threats weren't empty. One evening, Ethan returned home to find his living room window shattered. On the floor lay a brick wrapped in a piece of paper. Written on it in bold red letters were the words, "You're next." Ethan's hands trembled as he called Laura. Within minutes, she and her team were at his house, combing through the scene for evidence. "This is a message," Laura said grimly. "They want you scared, maybe even to run. Don't give them that satisfaction." Ethan nodded, but fear gnawed at him. How far would Victor go, and how could he protect himself and those he cared about? Determined to take control of the situation, Ethan began taking precautions. He installed security cameras, reinforced his doors and windows, and even started self-defense training. With Laura's help, he developed a safety plan that included emergency contacts and escape routes. Through it all, Claire remained by his side. Her unwavering support bolstered his resolve, reminding him that he wasn't alone in this fight. "We'll get through this," Claire said one evening, as they reviewed the security footage together. "You're stronger than you think, Ethan." Her words gave him a glimmer of hope. The road ahead was uncertain, but Ethan was determined to face whatever came his way. He had rebuilt his life once before, and he would do it again if necessary. The shadows of Langston's network loomed. Ethan prepared for the battle ahead. This time, he wouldn't be caught off guard. He was ready to fight for his future and the peace he had worked so hard to achieve. Ethan had never felt more determined. After the threats, the shattered window, and the ominous messages, he knew he couldn't live in fear anymore. With Laura's support, he devised a plan to confront Victor and his growing network, not just for himself, but for everyone still haunted by Langston's shadow. Laura's team had been working tirelessly to gather intelligence on Victor's operation. The man had been careful, using intermediaries and avoiding direct involvement in criminal activities, but one slip and intercepted communication revealed his plans to consolidate power. He was organizing a meeting with key players in Langston's former network, and Laura saw this as the perfect opportunity to strike. "We take him down," Laura said, her eyes blazing with determination. "But we need you, Ethan. You know these people. You can identify them and provide insight we might miss." Ethan hesitated. The idea of walking into a den of criminals terrified him, but he couldn't ignore the opportunity to put an end to this nightmare. "I'll do it," he said finally. Whatever it takes. The plan was simple, but risky. Laura's team would monitor the meeting from a nearby location, ready to intervene at the first sign of trouble. Ethan would accompany her undercover, agent posing as a potential recruit. His job was to gather information, identify key players, and confirm Victor's involvement. The night of the meeting arrived quickly. Ethan dressed in dark, inconspicuous clothing and joined Laura's team in a cramped surveillance van parked a block away from the meeting site. The tension was palpable as they reviewed the plan one last time. "Stay calm," Laura said, her hand resting on Ethan's shoulder. "We've got your back." Ethan nodded, his heart pounding as he stepped out of the van and walked toward the abandoned warehouse where the meeting was taking place. Inside the warehouse, the air was thick with smoke and tension. Men and women stood in small groups, their conversations hushed and guarded. Ethan's guide, the undercover agent posing as his handler, led him through the crowd to a corner where Victor sat surrounded by his closest associates. Victor was as imposing as Ethan had imagined. Tall and broad-shouldered, with sharp eyes that seemed to see straight through people, he exuded an air of authority that kept everyone around him on edge. "This is the guy I told you about," the agent said, nodding toward Ethan. "He's interested in joining the operation." Victor's gaze shifted to Ethan, scrutinizing him for a long moment before speaking. "You look familiar," he said, his voice low and menacing. "Have we met?" Ethan's stomach churned, but he forced himself to stay calm. "I don't think so," he said, keeping his tone steady. "But I've heard about you. People say you're the one to watch." Victor smirked, seemingly satisfied with the answer. "Smart man," he said. "Let's talk." As the meeting progressed, Ethan listened carefully, noting the names and faces of everyone present. Victor outlined his plans to expand operations, boasting about his ability to outmaneuver the authorities. The arrogance in his voice made Ethan's blood boil, but he kept his emotions in check, focusing on the task at hand. When Victor mentioned a shipment of illegal goods scheduled to arrive in the coming days, Ethan's ears perked up. This was the evidence Laura needed to take him down. "Sounds like you've got it all figured out," Ethan said, trying to sound impressed. "What's the next move?" Victor leaned back in his chair, a smug grin on his face. "The next move is to make sure everyone knows who's in charge," he said, "and that starts with eliminating the competition." The veiled threat sent a chill down Ethan's spine. He glanced at his guide, who gave a subtle nod, signaling that they had gathered enough information. As Ethan and the agent prepared to leave, Victor's voice stopped them in their tracks. "Wait," he said, his eyes narrowing. "Something's not right about you." Ethan's heart raced as Victor rose from his seat, towering over him. The room fell silent, all eyes on the confrontation. "Who are you really?" Victor demanded. Before Ethan could respond, the warehouse doors burst open and Laura's team stormed in, their weapons drawn. Chaos erupted as people scrambled to escape, but the agents were well prepared, quickly apprehending Victor and several of his associates. In the midst of the commotion, Ethan found himself face to face with Victor once more. The man's expression was a mixture of fury and disbelief as he was handcuffed and led away. "This isn't over," Victor growled, his voice filled with venom. Ethan didn't respond. He watched as the man who had threatened his peace was taken into custody, a sense of relief washing over him. Back at the surveillance van, Laura's team celebrated their success. The operation had gone off almost perfectly, and the information Ethan had gathered would be instrumental in dismantling the remnants of Langston's network. "You did great," Laura said, her eyes shining with gratitude. "We couldn't have done this without you." Ethan smiled faintly, the weight of the night finally settling on him. "I'm just glad it's over," he said. But as he sat in the van, watching the city lights blur past, he couldn't shake Victor's parting words. The fight might not be over, but for now, Ethan allowed himself to breathe, knowing he had taken a crucial step toward reclaiming his life. In the days that followed, news of Victor's arrest dominated the headlines. The community center became a beacon of hope, a symbol of resilience against the darkness that had plagued the town for so long. Ethan found solace in his work, knowing he had made a difference, and while he remained cautious, always looking over his shoulder, he refused to let fear control him. He had faced his demons and emerged stronger, ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead. Ethan woke to the sound of birdsong outside his window. The morning sun streamed through the curtains, casting a warm glow across the room. It had been a week since Victor's arrest and the dramatic takedown of his network. For the first time, in what felt like forever, Ethan felt a sense of peace, though he knew his journey wasn't entirely over. The day began like any other, with Ethan heading to the community center. Over the past months, the center had become his sanctuary, a place where he could channel his energy into something positive. The arrest of Victor and the dismantling of Langston's empire had brought a renewed sense of safety to the town, and the center was thriving as a result. Claire greeted him at the door, her smile as bright as ever. "Morning, boss," she teased. "Ready for another day of saving the world?" Ethan chuckled. "One step at a time, Claire. What's on the agenda?" "We got a meeting with the city council this afternoon about expanding the youth programs," she said, handing him a clipboard. "And Mrs. Henderson wants to talk to you about starting a gardening club." "Gardening club?" Ethan raised an eyebrow. "Hey, it's all part of building a community," Claire said with a grin. "Besides, she's got a green thumb. You should see her tomatoes." Ethan laughed, feeling lighter than he had in months. The weight of his past was beginning to lift, replaced by a sense of purpose and belonging. As the day progressed, Ethan couldn't shake the feeling that something was still unresolved. Despite Victor's arrest, there were whispers that remnants of Langston's network were regrouping, desperate to reclaim their lost power. Laura had assured him that the authorities were keeping a close eye on the situation, but Ethan's instincts told him to stay vigilant. Later that evening, Ethan met with Laura at her office. She looked tired but determined, her desk cluttered with case files and notes. "How's it going?" Ethan asked as he took a seat across from her. "Busy," she admitted. "We're still sorting through the fallout from Victor's arrest. His network was bigger than we thought, and some of his associates have gone underground." "Do you think they'll come after me?" Ethan asked, voicing the fear that had been lingering in the back of his mind. Laura hesitated. "It's possible, but you're not alone in this, Ethan. We've got your back." Her words were comforting, but Ethan knew he couldn't rely solely on the authorities. He needed to be proactive to ensure his safety and the safety of those around him. Over the next few days, Ethan worked with Laura and her team to strengthen his security measures. He updated the community center's surveillance system, coordinated with local law enforcement, and even arranged self-defense workshops for staff and volunteers. The goal wasn't just to protect himself, but to empower the community to stand against any threats that might arise. One evening, as Ethan locked up the center, he noticed a figure standing across the street. The person was partially obscured by shadows, but there was something familiar about their posture. Ethan's heart raced as he considered his options. Should he confront them? Call the police? Before he could decide, the figure stepped into the light. It was Jack, Langston's former associate, who had warned Ethan about Victor weeks earlier. "We need to talk," Jack said, his voice low. Ethan led Jack inside, locking the door behind them. "What are you doing here?" he demanded. Jack looked uneasy, glancing around the empty building before speaking. "Victor's people are regrouping," he said. They're not happy about how things went down, and they blame you for it. Word.
They're planning something big? Ethan's stomach sank. What do you mean, something big? I don't have all the details, Jack admitted. But they're desperate, and desperate people do dangerous things. You need to...
Be careful. Ethan nodded, his mind racing. Thanks for the warning, but why are you telling me this? Jack hesitated. Because I owe you. You could have outed me to the cops, but you didn't. Consider this me repaying the favor. The next morning, Ethan shared Jack's warning with Laura. She took it seriously, mobilizing her team to investigate the threat. At the same time, Ethan reached out to his network of allies, rallying the community to stay alert and prepared. We've been through worse, Claire said during a staff meeting. We'll get through this too. Her words resonated with everyone in the room, bolstering their resolve. Together they developed a plan to keep the center running smoothly while prioritizing safety. It was a delicate balance, but one they were determined to maintain. As the days turned into weeks, the tension began to ease. Laura's team made several arrests, disrupting the remnants of Victor's network and preventing any major incidents. The community center continued to thrive, becoming a symbol of resilience and hope for the entire town. For Ethan, the experience had been transformative. He had faced his fears, confronted his past, and emerged stronger. Though the road ahead was still uncertain, he felt ready to embrace whatever challenges came his way. One evening, as the sun set over the town, Ethan stood outside the community center, watching as families gathered for a movie night on the lawn. Laughter and chatter filled the air, a testament to the strength of the community he had helped build. "We did good, didn't we?" Claire said, joining him. Ethan smiled, his heart full of gratitude. "Yeah, we did." As the first stars appeared in the sky, Ethan allowed himself to believe in a brighter future. The past would always be a part of him, but it no longer defined him. He had found his place, his purpose, and he wasn't going to let anything take that away. Months had passed since Victor's arrest and the dismantling of Langston's network. The community center flourished, becoming a beacon of hope and unity. Ethan, though cautious, finally felt at peace. He had transformed his life and found purpose, no longer a prisoner of his past. Laura and her team remained vigilant, ensuring that any remnants of Langston's empire were dealt with swiftly. Her partnership with Ethan grew beyond the professional, marked by mutual respect and friendship. One sunny afternoon, Ethan stood in the community garden watching children plant flowers. Claire joined him, carrying a basket of fresh vegetables. "You've built something incredible here," she said, her voice filled with admiration. Ethan smiled, his heart full. "I didn't do it alone. This was a team effort." As the children
laughed and played, Ethan realized that he had finally reclaimed his life.
The pain of betrayal and the scars of his past had not disappeared, but they had shaped him into someone stronger, someone ready to embrace the future. The shadows of Langston's reign were fading, replaced by the light of a community determined to thrive. For Ethan, it wasn't just the end of a dark chapter, but the beginning of a new story, one filled with hope, resilience, and endless possibilities.